The gunshot echoed through the night, jarring Cecilia West awake from her fitful sleep. She scrambled off the thin mattress, grabbing the small satchel she'd kept packed for this very moment. The boarding house room had been her prison for 3 weeks, and tonight would be her last. Her husband's men were coming for her, and this time she wouldn't wait to be found. Wyoming Territory, 1875. A place where freedom stretched as far as the horizon unless you were a woman with a price on your head. "I told you she'd be here," a gruff voice called from downstairs. "Check every room." Cecilia's heart hammered against her ribs as she slipped through the window, clutching the drainpipe with trembling hands. Her thin cotton nightdress provided little protection against the cool night air, but fear kept her warm enough as she descended to the alley below. The moon betrayed her with its bright light, casting her shadow against the wooden buildings of the small frontier town. She ran barefoot through the back streets, ducking behind rain barrels and stacks of crates whenever she heard voices. The sound of horses and men shouting drove her toward the edge of town, where several wagons were positioned for an early morning departure. A cattle drive she'd overheard in the general store earlier that day. Heading north, away from Texas, away from him. When she reached the wagons, she crawled beneath the largest one, pressing herself against the cool earth. The iron frame above her offered sanctuary from searching eyes, and she prayed the darkness would hide her until the men departed. She clutched her satchel to her chest, trying to quiet her ragged breathing. "She came this way, fan out." The voice belonged to Fletcher, her husband's most devoted hired gun. Cecilia squeezed her eyes shut, as if that might make her invisible. Minutes felt like hours as boots crunched in the dirt around her. One pair stopped directly beside the wagon. She held her breath. Nothing here. Maybe she headed for the livery, the man called, mercifully moving on. For 2 more hours, Cecilia remained frozen beneath the wagon, listening as the search gradually moved back toward town. Only when the distant church bell tolled 3 times did she allow herself to breathe normally again. Her muscles ached from tension, but she dared not move until morning. She must have dozed off because the sound of a man's voice startled her awake. "Well now, what do we have here?" Sunlight streamed across the dirt, and a pair of worn leather boots stood inches from her face. Cecilia stifled a gasp, shrinking further beneath the wagon. The man crouched down, his face coming into view. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 30, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of the sky after a storm. A dark Stetson cast shadows across his features, but she could see the stubble on his strong jaw and the curiosity in his expression. "Madam, I don't mean to alarm you, but you're under my supply wagon and we're fixing to leave." Cecilia remained silent, her mind racing. He didn't sound like one of Fletcher's men, but she couldn't be certain. "I'm not looking to cause trouble," the man continued, his voice low and steady. "But I can't rightly drive off with you under there. Please," Cecilia whispered, finding her voice at last. "There are men looking for me." The man's expression changed, hardening slightly as he glanced around the yard. "What kind of men?" "The kind who work for my husband. The kind who won't stop until they find me." The cowboy was quiet for a moment, considering. "Is your husband the law?" Cecilia shook her head. "He's a cattle baron from Texas, Lawrence West." Recognition flickered in the man's eyes. "I've heard the name." "Then you know why I'm running." The cowboy nodded slowly, then extended his hand. "Isaac Anderson, trail boss of this outfit." Cecilia hesitated, then reached out to take his hand. His grip was firm but gentle as he helped her slide from beneath the wagon. She stood unsteadily, painfully aware of her nightdress and bare feet. Isaac quickly shrugged out of his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "You can't stay here," he said, glancing toward town. "They'll come back once they realize you haven't left." "I have nowhere to go," Cecilia admitted. Isaac studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded, as if coming to a decision. "You're mine to protect now." "What?" "We're moving cattle north to Montana Territory, 2 months on the trail. By the time we arrive, you'll be far from Texas and your husband's reach." "Why would you help me?" Cecilia asked, clutching his coat tighter around her shoulders. "Because I've seen what Lawrence West does to those who cross him," Isaac replied, his jaw tight. "No woman deserves that fate." Before Cecilia could respond, shouts echoed from the direction of town. Isaac gripped her arm. We've got to move, now. He led her quickly to the supply wagon and helped her climb onto the high seat. Stay down, he instructed, throwing a rough woolen blanket over her. I'll handle this. Cecilia huddled beneath the blanket, listening as horses approached and men called out. She recognized Fletcher's voice among them. Morning, gentlemen, Isaac greeted, his tone casual. Something I can help you with. Looking for a woman, Fletcher replied. Ran off from her husband last night. Brown hair, green eyes, might be wearing a nightdress. Haven't seen anyone fitting that description, Isaac said, but we've been busy loading up since dawn, getting ready to move out. Mind if we check your wagons? Cecilia's heart nearly stopped. Actually, I do mind, Isaac replied, his voice hardening. We're on a schedule and my cattle are getting restless. Unless you've got a warrant, I suggest you keep looking elsewhere. A tense silence followed, and Cecilia could imagine Fletcher weighing his options. Finally, he spoke again. If you see her, there's good money for her return, Mr. West is offering $500. I'll keep that in mind, Isaac said. Good day, gentlemen. Hoofbeats signaled their departure, but Cecilia remained motionless under the blanket until Isaac's hand gently touched her shoulder. They're gone for now, he said quietly, but we need to move. The boys have the herd ready to go. Cecilia emerged from beneath the blanket, her eyes meeting Isaac's. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, he warned. 2 months on the trail isn't easy, especially for a woman, and those men might follow. I can work, Cecilia insisted. I'm stronger than I look. Isaac studied her for a moment, then nodded. We'll need to get you some proper clothes and a story for the men. What kind of story, my sister? Isaac decided. Coming along to cook for the outfit. It'll explain why you're with us and give you a reason to stay close to camp. Can you cook? Cecilia asked. Isaac's lips quirked into a half smile. Can you? Better than most, she replied. My husband didn't marry me for my cooking, but I managed the kitchen staff at our ranch for 5 years. Then we might just make this work. Isaac picked up the reins. There's a settlement about a day's ride from here. We can get you outfitted there. As the wagon lurched forward, joining the procession of riders and cattle, Cecilia allowed herself a small measure of hope. She wasn't free yet, but for the first time in years, freedom seemed possible. The first week on the trail tested Cecilia in ways she hadn't anticipated. The days were long, starting before dawn and ending well after dusk. Isaac had procured clothes for her at the settlement: sturdy trousers, cotton shirts, a wide-brimmed hat, and boots that were a size too large but served their purpose. To the dozen cowboys driving the herd, she was introduced as Cecilia Anderson, Isaac's widowed sister from Denver. You don't look much alike, one of the older cowboys, Hank, had observed skeptically. Different mothers, Isaac had replied without hesitation. Same stubborn disposition, though. The men had accepted the explanation with varying degrees of suspicion, but none questioned Isaac directly. As trail boss, his word was law, and the presence of a woman who could cook something besides beans was welcomed by most. Cecilia threw herself into her role, rising early to prepare breakfast over the campfire and staying up late to clean the tin plates and iron cookware. During the day, she rode in the supply wagon, learning from the chuck wagon cook, an elderly man named Jeremiah who seemed grateful for the help. Never thought I'd be teaching a lady the ways of trail cooking, he remarked one afternoon as they bumped along a particularly rough stretch of prairie. I'm hardly a lady out here, Cecilia replied, gesturing to her dirt-streaked clothes and wind-tangled hair. Nonsense, Jeremiah said. Being a lady ain't about fancy dresses and tea parties, it's about dignity, and you've got that in spades, Miss Cecilia. She smiled at that, feeling something inside her uncoil slightly. The rigid constraints of her former life, the corsets and calling cards, the endless social expectations seemed to belong to another woman entirely. In the evenings, after the cattle were settled and the men had eaten their fill, Isaac would often join her by the fire. Their conversations started as brief exchanges about the next day's journey or the supplies they would need at the next settlement. But gradually, they began to share more. How did you become a trail boss so young? Cecilia asked one night, nearly 2 weeks into their journey. Isaac poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing into the night sky. Started as a ranch hand when I was 15, worked my way up to foreman by 22, then the war came. You fought for the Union, he nodded. 2 years with the cavalry. When I came back, ranching had changed. Texas cattle were worth money up north, and I knew how to move livestock safely. The rest just happened. Nothing just happens, Cecilia observed quietly. Isaac glanced at her, a small smile playing at his lips. No, I suppose not. He hesitated, then asked, How did you end up married to Lawrence West? Cecilia stiffened slightly, but answered. My father was a businessman in San Antonio. He owed money to powerful men, including Lawrence. I was 17 when Lawrence offered to forgive the debt in exchange for my hand. You had no choice, Isaac said, his voice hard. There's always a choice, Cecilia replied. I chose my family's security over my freedom. I just didn't understand the true cost at the time. Isaac was quiet for a long moment. When did you decide to run? Cecilia stared into the fire, memories washing over her. After 5 years of marriage, I still hadn't given Lawrence a son. He blamed me, of course. The beatings got worse. Then I discovered I was with child. Her voice faltered. I lost the baby after he pushed me down the stairs. That's when I knew I had to leave or die trying. Without a word, Isaac reached across the space between them and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, but his touch was gentle. They sat in silence, connected by that simple gesture, until the fire burned low and the night grew cold. As the days passed, Cecilia found herself watching Isaac when he didn't notice. The way he sat tall in the saddle, how he spoke to his men with respect but clear authority, the rare but transformative smile that appeared when something amused him. He was nothing like Lawrence, where her husband had been cruel and controlling. Isaac was firm but fair. Where Lawrence demanded obedience, Isaac inspired loyalty. One afternoon, nearly a month into their journey, a summer storm rolled across the plains without warning. The sky darkened to an ominous green, and the cattle grew restless, sensing the change in pressure. Get to the wagons. Isaac shouted over the rising wind. Cecilia, secure everything you can. She worked quickly, tying down the cooking equipment and covering the food supplies with oilcloth. The first fat raindrops were just beginning to fall when the lightning struck a nearby cottonwood tree. The crack of thunder was instantaneous and deafening. The cattle panicked. 2,000 beeves suddenly bolted, their hooves thundering across the prairie. Cowboys shouted and whistled, trying to turn the herd, but the storm's fury made it nearly impossible to see or hear. Cecilia watched in horror as a young cowboy named Billy was thrown from his horse directly in the path of the stampeding cattle. Without thinking, she grabbed the reins of a nearby horse, swung into the saddle, and rode toward him. The rain lashed her face as she galloped alongside the rushing herd. Billy was struggling to his feet, clearly dazed. Cecilia reached him just as the first cattle approached, leaning down from the saddle to grasp his arm and haul him up behind her. The horse staggered under the double weight but kept running, carrying them away from the main body of the stampede. When they reached safety, Cecilia slid from the saddle, her legs shaking so badly she could barely stand. Billy dismounted beside her, pale but alive. "Miss Cecilia," he gasped, "you saved my life." Before she could respond, Isaac rode up, his face a mask of barely controlled fear and anger. He dismounted in one fluid motion and strode toward them. "What were you thinking?" he demanded, gripping her shoulders. "You could have been killed." "Billy needed help," she replied, rain streaming down her face. "I couldn't just watch him die." Isaac stared at her, his eyes searching hers. Something shifted in his expression, and suddenly he pulled her against him, holding her tightly. "Don't you ever scare me like that again," he murmured against her wet hair. Cecilia found herself clinging to him, the adrenaline of the moment giving way to delayed terror. "I won't," she whispered, though they both knew it was a promise she might not be able to keep. The storm passed, the cattle were eventually rounded up, and life on the trail continued. But something had changed between Cecilia and Isaac. The careful distance they had maintained was gone, replaced by a tentative intimacy neither seemed willing to acknowledge directly. They were crossing into Montana territory when trouble found them again. The outfit had stopped near a small settlement to resupply and give the men a night of recreation, before the final push to their destination. Cecilia remained at camp with Jeremiah and two of the younger cowboys while Isaac and the others rode into town. She was tending the fire when hoofbeats approached from the south, the direction they had come from. Cecilia's blood ran cold as she recognized Fletcher leading three other men into camp. "Well, well," Fletcher drawled, dismounting, "if it isn't Mrs. West herself." Jeremiah stood, his hand moving toward the rifle propped against the chuck wagon. "This is private property, mister. State your business." "My business is with the lady," Fletcher replied, his eyes never leaving Cecilia. "Mr. West has been looking for his wife. Seems she got herself lost." "I'm not lost," Cecilia said, her voice steadier than she felt, "and I'm not going back." Fletcher's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's not your decision to make, madam. We'll be taking you home now." One of the young cowboys, Danny, stepped forward. "The lady said she's not going." Fletcher's hand moved to his holster. "This doesn't concern you, boy. It concerns all of us," Jeremiah said, raising his rifle. "Now get back on your horses and ride out." Fletcher laughed. "Three old men and a woman against 4 armed riders. Those aren't odds I'd take. How about 7 armed cowboys and a trail boss?" Isaac's voice cut through the tension as he rode into camp, followed by the rest of the outfit. "Those odds suit you better." Fletcher's expression hardened as he assessed the situation. Isaac dismounted, walking slowly toward the standoff, his hand resting casually on his holstered pistol. "Fletcher," Isaac acknowledged coldly. "Still doing Lawrence West's dirty work, I see." "Anderson," Fletcher spat on the ground. "Should have known you'd be involved. West will pay handsomely for his wife's return." "She's not property to be bought and sold," Isaac replied. "She's under my protection now." "Protection?" Fletcher sneered. "Is that what you call it?" "Wait until West hears his wife's been playing house with a cattle driver." Isaac's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. "You have 2 choices. Ride away now and tell West you never found her, or start something you won't live to finish." The tension stretched between them, nearly visible in the fading light. Finally, Fletcher jerked his head toward his men. "This isn't over, Anderson. West doesn't forget, and he doesn't forgive." "Neither do I," Isaac replied. "Remember that." Fletcher and his men mounted up and rode away, but the encounter left a shadow over the camp. That night, Isaac posted extra guards and sat beside Cecilia at the fire, closer than usual. "They won't give up," she said quietly. "Neither will I," Isaac replied, his eyes reflecting the flames. "We're only 3 days from our destination. After we deliver the herd, we can figure out what comes next." "What comes next?" Cecilia repeated, staring into the fire. "I haven't allowed myself to think that far ahead." Isaac took her hand, a gesture that had become familiar in recent weeks. "What do you want, Cecilia? If you could have anything," she considered the question seriously. "Freedom," she said finally. "A place where I make my own choices, where no one owns me." And after that, Cecilia looked at him then, really looked at him. After that. "Perhaps someone to share that freedom with, someone who sees me as an equal, not a possession." Isaac's eyes held hers. "I see you, Cecilia. I've seen you from the moment you crawled out from under my wagon." Her heart quickened. "And what do you see?" "A woman braver than most men I know. A woman who deserves every happiness this world can offer." Cecilia's breath caught as Isaac leaned closer, his intent clear. When his lips met hers, gentle but certain, she felt something she had never experienced with Lawrence: desire mixed with respect, passion tempered by tenderness. When they parted, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I don't have much to offer. A small ranch in Montana, a life that's never easy, but everything I have would be shared equally between us." "Are you proposing, Mr. Anderson?" Cecilia asked, a smile playing at her lips. "Inelegantly, but yes," he admitted. "Though I know you're still married in the eyes of the law." The reminder of her legal status sobered her. "Lawrence will never grant me a divorce." "Then we'll find another way," Isaac promised. "I won't lose you, Cecilia, not to him, not to anyone." The final days of the journey passed in a blur of activity and anticipation. The cattle were delivered to their buyer, the men paid their wages, and decisions had to be made. Most of the cowboys would return south for the next drive, but Isaac and Cecilia, along with Jeremiah and a few others, headed for Isaac's ranch in the foothills of the Montana mountains. The ranch was modest, but beautiful, a sturdy cabin nestled in a valley with a clear stream running nearby and pastureland stretching toward distant peaks. When they arrived, Cecilia stood in the yard, taking in what might become her home. "It needs work," Isaac said, watching her reaction carefully. "The roof leaks in the northwest corner, and the barn could use reinforcing before winter." "It's perfect," Cecilia replied honestly. That night, after Jeremiah and the others had settled in the bunkhouse, Isaac and Cecilia sat on the cabin's porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast Montana sky. "I spoke with a judge in town while we were selling the cattle," Isaac said. "About your situation." Cecilia tensed. "What did he say?" "That Montana territory doesn't recognize marriages performed under duress. If you were underage and forced to marry, you might have grounds for annulment here." Hope flickered in Cecilia's heart. Would that stand if Lawrence challenged it? The judge couldn't say for certain. But he suggested, "We gather evidence, witnesses who knew about your circumstances, documentation of your age when you married." Cecilia thought of the few people who might testify on her behalf: her younger sister who had written occasionally, a former household servant who had witnessed Lawrence's cruelty. It would mean contacting people in Texas. "Carefully," Isaac agreed, "but it might be our best chance." They fell silent, contemplating the challenges ahead. Then Cecilia reached for Isaac's hand. "Whatever happens with the law, I know where I belong now." Isaac brought her hand to his lips. "With me, with you," she confirmed. "Not because you own me or control me, but because I choose you. Every day I will choose you." The next morning, a letter arrived from town delivered by a ranch hand who had gone in for supplies. It was addressed to Isaac, but the handwriting was unfamiliar. He opened it at the kitchen table while Cecilia prepared breakfast. As he read, his expression darkened. "What is it?" Cecilia asked, setting down the coffee pot. Isaac looked up, his eyes troubled. "It's from a lawyer in San Antonio. Lawrence West is dead." Cecilia sank into a chair, shock washing over her. "Dead? How?" "Shot during a business dispute 3 weeks ago," Isaac read from the letter. "Apparently, he had made many enemies. And the lawyer is writing to you because—" Isaac handed her the letter. "Because Lawrence changed his will before he died. He left everything to his wife, you, with the stipulation that you must return to claim it within 6 months." Cecilia read the letter twice, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't understand. Why would he leave everything to me? He must have known I'd run." "Maybe in his own twisted way he loved you," Isaac suggested. "Or maybe it was one final attempt to control you from beyond the grave." Cecilia stared at the paper. The West holdings were extensive, thousands of acres of prime Texas ranchland, cattle, businesses in San Antonio, a fortune by any measure. "What will you do?" Isaac asked quietly. She looked up at him, suddenly certain. "I'll go to claim what's mine. Then I'll sell it all and use the money to build something of my own choosing. Something here, with me." The vulnerability in Isaac's voice touched her deeply. Cecilia rose and moved around the table to stand before him. She took his face in her hands. "Everything I want is right here, Isaac. The money doesn't change that, but it does give us choices we didn't have yesterday." He pulled her onto his lap, holding her close. "I don't need wealth, Cecilia, I just need you, and you have me," she promised. "But think of what we could build together, a larger ranch, a herd of our own. Security for the future." Isaac smiled, the rare, transformative smile that had first captured her heart on the trail. "When you put it that way, Mrs. Anderson-to-be, how can I possibly object?" 6 months later, Cecilia stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching as workers completed the new barn. The money from selling Lawrence's holdings had transformed Isaac's modest ranch into one of the largest operations in the territory. More importantly, it had secured their future against any challenges that might come. Isaac joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his hands resting gently on the small swell of her belly. Their child, their son, the doctor believed would be born in the spring. Any regrets? Isaac asked, his breath warm against her ear. Cecilia leaned back against him, remembering the terrified woman who had hidden beneath his wagon nearly a year ago. "Only that I didn't find you sooner. You found me exactly when you were meant to," Isaac replied. "And I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful that you did." As the sun set over their land, painting the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson, Cecilia turned in her husband's arms to kiss him. She had escaped in the night and hidden under his wagon, but what she had found was far more precious than mere safety. She had found a man who saw her strength, who valued her independence, who loved her not as a possession but as an equal. She had found home.